So I wanted to cover what someone should be looking for in a donor. There's effectively 4 primary qualifications I believe are most relevant for a donor. Health, personality, and IQ are the 3 major ones. Each of those are highly genetic, and each have a significant effect on what the child will become. In addition to that, I value trustworthiness, because if you can't trust the donor, you can't trust any of those first 3 are actually true. So those are the 4 major qualifications I look for in a donor. The reason for those is because each of those will have a long-term effect on how the child will become. Many people come into this with a number of physical attributes they're looking for: blue eyes, blonde hair, height, race, etc. And I think part of that is that they're trained to believe that that's what they can pick from, because that's what you pick at a sperm bank. But remember, this is much better than anonymous sperm. You get far more. Yes, if you have no other way of knowing anything about the donor, you might as well pick the donor with the eye color you like. But when you can actually pick from donors and you can actually know the donor, you should be focusing on these other things. I've said it previously, I'll say it again. Whether the kid has blue eyes or green eyes, he's going to be just as happy, healthy, well-adjusted child. It's not going to affect who he'll become. A few extra IQ points will help him excel better in college, in school, professional life, everywhere. Health allow him to live a longer, happier life. Of course, personality, that's just whether he's the sort of kid you would want to be proud of. Those things actually affect what the child will become. So those are my primary areas of focus. In particular, you want to make sure you're actually asking about these in detail. So for instance, IQ, you want to ask what their SATs were. That's a really good one, because SAT tests have a very close correlation to actual IQ. And most people have taken SAT or ACT tests, the same thing, either one would work. You want to ask about their college and how they're doing in their career currently. Likewise for health, you want to ask about the full health history, ask about their parents or grandparents. In fact, there's a health questionnaire available on the Known Donor Registry. I suggest you actually provide that to your donors and ask them to fill it out, just so you know you're getting full detail. In personality, that one's a little harder. You just want to speak to the donor for a while, talk with him. Doesn't always have to be interrogating. Sometimes just spending a while speaking, getting to know each other can be useful. I have actually a number of suggested questions which you can ask already on a written blog that you can access. I will try to put the link somewhere around here. But you can also access it by going to the Known Donor Registry, looking up raw ranks, and checking out my blogs. You can find a number of useful blogs. So I won't go into much detail about specific things to look for, because I already have all those recommended questions. Instead, I'm going to address certain warning signs that I watch out for. So the biggest warning sign in my mind is that they won't share their name. Now, this actually is perhaps a little unfair. There are legitimate reasons for donors wishing to hide their names. It does give them a certain level of protection against someone trying to push for child support. In fact, there's probably some legitimate, decent, good donors out there who are truly desiring to help you, who simply are protecting their name for their own protection. However, I have seen an above average number of problematic donors from those donors that won't share their name. In fact, quite a significant number of problematic donors. Why that is? Well, there's a constant so-called gift mentality that if you're anonymous, you feel you can get away with more. Some of the worst donors actually intentionally change their usernames every few months so that those who have learned that their old name was associated with a bad person won't know who they are now, so you can't look up them and find out their past bad acts. There are various reasons. There tend to be far more problematic donors amongst those who don't share their name. And what's more, you're also in a position where you can't protect yourself because you can't research them. And I fully suggest researching donors. You should Google them. You should look up their name. You should look up their, you should do a full Google search. I probably do a different blog on that. But the point is, with donors that don't share their name, you're in a higher risk category for donors while simultaneously having less resources available to research them. And so even if it would potentially cross out what could be the occasional decent donor, I personally don't recommend using any donors that share their full name and SCT tests with that name on it, because it's just too great a risk. It's not worth it. In addition, you should be cautious of any donors who try to claim to be too fertile. The truth is, donations can take a while. You're looking at an average of 4 to 5 tries for perfectly healthy young women with no fertility issues for fresh. Shipping can take significantly longer, 7, 8, 9 tries. The exact number is hard to say. We don't have that much research on it. But the point is, it can take a while. You will meet a number of donors who will claim that all their successes were first or second try and will try to guarantee you the same. The truth is, no donor can promise that. If a donor does not have any health issues or anything causing him to have poor fertility, all donors have roughly the same fertility. There is no such thing as a super donor who has absurdly high fertility above and beyond every other donor. That's just not the way the human body works. If you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, if that was the case, evolution would ensure that we all reach that level of super fertility. The point is, there is no super donor. There is no one who can guarantee first-time successes. And donors who are claiming that generally are not being entirely honest with you, because it is unlikely that they can make that claim. Now, if a donor's only had 1 or 2 donations, it's possible he got lucky and he did have a few early successes with it, without, first, second time success just out of luck. It still wouldn't mean he was super fertile, but at least he would be telling you the truth. But as the donors have had more successes, the odds that all the successes for a second time become very slim. And donors who are experienced to donate often are not going to be able to claim to be super fertile. There's just no way statistically that they had that many successes, which means the donors are either blatantly lying or more often exaggerating, perhaps even they believe it themselves. One of the donors who I believe is most prone to this that I know of, won't name names, I believe honestly believes he is more fertile, but only because he's very good at believing what he wants to believe. So the point is, it's not always blatant dishonesty. Sometimes it's just little hubris and wishful thinking. But nonetheless, there is no super fertile donor. And if a donor is trying to stress it too much, it may be a sign that they're not being entirely honest with you. And as I said, trustworthiness is one of the major qualifications you want to look for in a donor. Likewise, fairly obvious, I'm cautious of donors that only do NI. Donors that do both AI and NI and do not push for NI, which by the way, NI effectively is sex, natural insemination. And AI usually refers to fresh donations done through artificial insemination, not involving a doctor. Anyways, donors who do both and don't push one can be decent donors. There's a slightly higher STD risk, but often these donors aren't doing NI for many women. Often they haven't done any NI recently, and there's ways you can protect yourself STD-wise. But donors that only do NI tend to be rather problematic. I don't agree with the very philosophy. Them saying they're doing NI effectively says that they're not willing to do the donation method that is most comfortable for you, because most women prefer AI. Even if you happen to prefer NI, the fact that they won't offer AI for those women who are most comfortable with it really shows that they are not in it for your motivation. They'd rather pursue a few minutes of physical pleasure than do what is going to make you happiest in the long run. It also shows less of an interest in the child, because donors that do NI generally don't have the option of picking and choosing recipients to make sure they only donate to those who are good couples. They tend to have to settle for whoever's willing to do NI. But in addition, I've seen above average number of problematic donors who are focused on NI. So in general, I don't recommend donors that only do NI, or donors who are so-called NI preferred or who push NI too much. Even if you're okay with NI, I would still avoid them because they tend to be problematic in other areas. There's nothing wrong for a woman choosing NI if both sides want it, but I honestly suggest, even if you are interested in NI and sex for your donation, that you originally start looking for donors. You say that you're only looking for AI, and you only list AI as a donation option. Only after you've got to know the donor do you suggest NI. That way you know the donor is really there to donate for you because he wants to do what's best for you, rather than he's in it for sex. One other small potential advantage, and I don't stress this too much, generally donors who have donated at least 2 or 3 times tend to be a little easier. Brand new donors are a little more likely to disappear as they get cold feet, realizing that this is a lot more significant than they originally thought. a little bit more prone to becoming emotionally attached to the child. I want to exclude a new donor. After all donors are new the first time they donate. But I will admit, you tend to have slightly less issues with more experienced donors. But that one's far less relevant than the rest. Don't exclude a good donor just because he's new. Don't use a mediocre donor just because he's had experience. One other advantage, this is something that's going to sound odd, I prefer to hear that a donor has admitted to some minor health issues than a donor who says he has no health issues. Why is that? Because every donor has health issues. It's just the nature of life. Even if the donor himself has no issues, someone in his family, his parents, his grandparents, someone's died at an early age, someone has some genetic predisposition to some disorder. That's an inevitability of everyone. No one's perfect. So donors that admit to minor faults, are admitting and being honest about them. And usually the faults are minor and are going to have very little effect on the child. If their grandfather died of a heart attack at 60, that's really not much of a health risk for the child. But the fact that they admitted to it shows honesty. Whereas if a donor is admitting to nothing, you don't know whether or not it is because he has no health issues or if he's not aware of or not admitting to issues he does have. In fact, if you speak to a donor and he generally assures you that he has perfect health, I strongly recommend that you have him fill out a full health questionnaire that goes into detailed descriptions of all the potential disorders that could exist, because they probably have something. They may have just not thought of it, they might be thinking quickly and it just hasn't come to mind, but by making them fill out a full questionnaire, you're more guaranteed to get honest facts, because they have to either blatantly lie on an explicit line on that sheet or admit to small issues they do have. Finally, I wanted to briefly go over some non-issues that I've seen women concerned about that I don't consider too relevant. So one of the most common, some women get offended that donors are asking questions. Don't be offended by that. I mean, this is a two-way street. You're screening your donor to make sure that he's the best genetic option. The donor's screening you for the same thing and to make sure that you'll be a good parent. It is good for donors to ask questions. Frankly, I have a much higher opinion of any donor that does ask questions about the parent, but sadly about 80% of the donors don't. So I can't say to exclude all donors that don't ask questions of you, but definitely do not penalize a donor for asking the questions he needs to make sure that you are a good parent, because that's only fair for the child. Likewise, I've had women concerned about the cost. Some have been concerned that donors are asking them to cover the cost. Some have been concerned that donors are willing to cover some of the costs themselves. Generally, neither of those concern me. Work out the cost of the donor. Usually they're asking you to cover their expenses, and that's entirely reasonable. The only time to be concerned about the cost is if they're clearly asking for you to cover more expense than the actual donation would be. The most common example of that is donors have a set fee for shipping, $160, $180 for everyone we ship. Most times it's going to cost less than that, so they're usually going to be pocketing extra money, and that's more questionable. Finally, if you do see a potential issue with the donor, don't be afraid to speak to the donor about it. Don't be afraid to ask donor questions. This is a small issue I've seen a number of them. They feel like the donor's doing so much for them they can't afford to ask questions. Ask questions. Not all donors are perfect. You need to know which one's the best one for you. In addition, though, if you see a potential warning sign in a donor, don't exclude them immediately. You want to ask questions. You want to, frankly, go up to them and say, I've seen this. It concerns me. Can you address my concern? Give the donor a chance to prove themselves, because sometimes women have concerns that I don't consider too major, which can be easily addressed. And if you exclude the donor too early, you may have missed out on your best donor option. Now, if the donor fails to address your concerns, don't be afraid to exclude him, but at least speak to the donor to express your concern and see if he can perhaps address it. If you have any doubts, post something on the forums, known donor registry forums. You can even email me and ask me, get someone else's opinion whether or not what you're seeing is an issue. So that's a quick overview. Check out my recommended questions for more, and good luck in your donor hunt.